Did Swedenborg have any dialogue with Jesus?
Do the angels help us find and connect with our soulmate?
Does Swedenborg mention suicide?
Will we be able to see God when we pass away?
God is omniscient, and why would
How
he
can
allow
someone
evil?
gain heavenly reward?
Is the afterlife more likely?
Why can storms?
Does Swedenborg tell us anything about our spirits?
Is there any particular...
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Swedenborg in Life. It's the panel show. My name is Curtis Childs and I'm the host. But, that's not the big news today. We have a new panel member with us. This is Shada, and she is, I got to make sure I get it right, so I'm going to read your lower third, an MDiv student at the Center for Swedenborgian Studies. Shada, thanks so much for coming on with us.
Pleasure to be here.
And some of you may recognize that voice. Shada is in our show all the time as the voice of the Swedenborg quotes. So we're happy to have you here in full presence. And rounding out the panel is Dr. Jonathan Rose, series editor of the New Century Edition translations of the public theological works of Emanuel Swedenborg. And then,
nicely done, Curtis.
To his left is Chelsea Odner, writer extraordinaire and member of the Swedenborg Foundation team. Thanks everybody for coming out. So we're going to do what we do here, which is we interact with the audience. You guys ask us questions. We say a couple things, and hopefully they're related to the question you asked. Yes. So we're going to do it right now. Let's take a look at what's on your mind. This is all from the YouTube chat if you're watching, so get in there, ask your own questions. So our first one is... Ginger, was Swedenborg told why he was given his gift? And so the gift, I'm assuming in this because he was a very gifted dude in a lot of ways.
Right.
But I think the gift we're talking about here is you can see spirits, you can learn the secrets of heaven and hell, and you can, make books that make people make shows about your books later on. So why Swedenborg? I would like to know the answer myself. And does he ever mention that? So you have any thoughts, Jonathan?
Well, I think that in the Journal of Dreams, which you did a show about a couple of weeks ago, the 10 early signs of a spiritual awakening, he has such a sense of purpose in there. There's even though he doesn't necessarily know what it is, right. there's some purpose behind this. Mm-hmm. And he quite often says in his theological writings that here's why this is happening. He does develop over time a sense of like, why the purpose of this is to rescue the reputation of Scripture. The purpose of this is to show people that we do live after death, and not to be swallowed up by.
So I could see it happen for myself, or so I could understand. I totally know what you're talking about.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so there's some purpose. Yeah, more.
Well, I don't know where it is that he writes it, but I know at some point I've read that he reflects that all of his life. You said he was gifted in all these ways. He was a scientist and Swedish noble and all this stuff, but that he felt that all of his learning was leading to this later life work that he did, that it was preparing him for this next part, of his spiritual awakening and work that way. So he seems aware of that of why he had those other gifts that they served that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was at the Swedenborg Foundation board meetings because we just had an annual meeting, and I was talking to a couple of guys who were reading Swedenborg and reading sort of the books he wrote right before, the spiritual books that we look into here, and they're saying you can see kind of this progression where he's got some similar ideas that he's already deploying, but they go through this evolution, so it's sort of like, the evidence of what you're talking about there, Chelsea. So, Chada, you have any thoughts on this subject?
Well, yeah, I was just thinking about his sort of mental space of servanthood. Oh, yeah. It is such an amazing thing that he experienced, and many people would want to take advantage of it, for their own for their own needs, but
like we are right now.
Right.
We are one.
Yeah, but he seemed to remain pretty focused on, God's mission for him, and so I think that must have been a really important part of his nature to be able to remain focused on that and in humility.
Right, because he often wrote at the end of his books, or at the beginning, signed them servant. Emanuel Swedenborg, servant of the Lord. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's like he's always reminding himself of that at the same time, but making that his purpose.
Yeah, that's right.
To do good, do some kind of... there's definitely this is going to accomplish something. This information is going to accomplish something. So those are a couple of things. And I want to leave this question, but where did I hear that Leonardo da Vinci God tapped him on the shoulder, but he didn't take it up. Did you guys ever hear that?
No.
That
I've
Leonardo,
heard people mention that, I guess.
and, like, how could anyone have known that? But, like, maybe he kept a diary or something, that he was kind of like, maybe he could have done this, but he was like, no, I don't know. That's total slandering his reputation, but I don't know that. It's in my brain for some reason. Dangerous place. All right, let's look at the next one. Thanks, Ginger. This is from Ellen. In the Wiccan religion, God is viewed as both male, the physical, and female. Any thoughts? Well, we were just like, man, we're just about to write a show about this.
Yes,
yeah,
we are.
Sure, we have some thoughts. Does anyone have any thoughts to start with?
Well, sure. I mean, the main one that is just, it's funny that it's such a short phrase and yet we could contemplate it for eternity, which is that God created people and in his own image, and he created them male and female.
Yeah.
And so you have to, there are all those elements right there. So we think one God, and yet male and female are both created in the image and likeness of God. And so then how do we, wrap our head around that?
Yeah, and we've been having some good conversations at our right, because we're pondering an episode on sort of this topic, and it's sort of looking at it backwards, because we look at the derivatives, which are men and women, and we say like, hey, so which is God? But that Swedenborg, the way he describes us is we're kind of like these sort of echoes of the divine reality, which is this love and wisdom together. So it's sort of like we are like. Elements of God, rather than which category does God fit into? But certainly displaying both at the same time is super important. Yeah.
Well, yeah, another, because like you said, we were just thinking about this, and I was just reading about it today, that when Swedenborg talks about how the heavenly angels understand the commandment of to honor your father and mother, they understand that as honoring your father as love itself and your mother as wisdom itself, and so that those are those two qualities, the masculine and the feminine, if you want to think about it that way, the mother and the father, that are one in God. And it struck me that Swedenborg also talks about those two main forces, or whatever, love and wisdom, as love, I guess, would be equated with the underlying divine reality, right?
Right.
Yeah.
As like maybe more of the father side or something, and then the mother or wisdom as the capacity, the power to become manifest, this manifesting. So this dual thing going on that is one in God, but has these two qualities to it.
Totally.
Yeah, and there's this heady passage he writes about this, that in one work, I think it's in Divine Love and Wisdom, he talks about that God, I'll have to just paraphrase this in my own words, but it's like God is not just like a blob of godness, of undifferentiated divinity or something, that all things are infinitely one in God. So they're one, but you can talk about the divine mercy or the divine nemesis or different quality, divine truth, divine love, and so on. And there's one particular passage where Swedenborg gets quite personal about it. In True Christianity number 51, he says that love leaves the administration, the divine love leaves the administration of love to its partner, the divine wisdom. So the divine wisdom acts on behalf of the divine love. So there's a very kind of male and female kind of feeling, or marriage sort of feeling or something in there, that there's this partnership in these they're both in God. God is one. And, so it gets hard to understand. But.
Right, because we spend all this time saying, no, like the Trinity is all one, but then there's sort of parts and like whatever it all means. But yeah, that's cool. Shauna, do you have any thoughts?
Well, like George Dole's term, distinguishable oneness, which is a helpful way to think about it. My daughter is actually asking lots of questions about how to imagine God and whether or not it's best or useful to imagine God as a male or a female. And, sometimes it's hard for our human minds to understand what distinguishable oneness really means without like just flipping back and forth between images. Right. So it's sometimes helpful when we can just sort of, relax our minds and approach the concept as opposed to like trying to force it. I don't know. I found that to be more helpful, like those, remember those pictures that you would hide an image inside them and you would have to like relax your eyes before you could see the image. Right. It kind of reminds me of that. Yeah, the magic eye, right? Yeah, it's just like when you try to force it, it's harder than when you back off a little bit. I think we're more receptive to spiritual ideas in a way when we're not grasping so hard.
Yeah.
And what I still remember the feeling of when you get one of those to work. And you're like, oh, I did it. I know how to do it. The magic guy.
Right.
And I think
middle school.
I just want to add, it's sort of philosophical, but that is reminding me about how just the whole quality of truth, that we can think that there is something that is truth that just exists out there, and yet it's never separate from our experience, from the moment that we're in when we need it. Like that's when it has power. And I think of Swedenborg talks about how we or that the Lord appears, we were just talking about this too, appears to different communities, and he'll look different depending on the love and just who the person is as an individual. So it's similar, I think, with the maleness or the femaleness of God, of whether you're the way that our minds work, we do want to picture just a single person, that is maybe either male or female, that it can be different just in a different moment, or if you're contemplating a different passage from scripture, you're going to have one or the other appearing to you or something. And that's okay, that can all be, God connecting with you.
Yeah. So I think people came here for Swedenborg weird stuff. So I think we should give them some. And this is something it's too bad Karin's not here, because we've been talking with her too. But we hear about the grand human, right? In heaven, there's heaven is in the human form, and actually, because it's all organized by God's love and truth, it's actually in the form of God. Like that heaven is sort of the closest thing you could get if you could see it as a whole. But that in that human form, which is human, but has genitals of both.
Right, all the reproductive organs.
So but that would make you think, oh, that's different. But so somehow, the reflection of God is all things.
Is in all of the above. That's right.
So there we go. And we are sometime going to make a whole episode about that.
Yes.
So great question, Ellen. And let's take a look at our next one. This is Sole Purpose Artist. Do we die when we have achieved our purpose that we came to do?
Ooh.
Yeah.
Well, I was just reading about the process of regeneration. That is how we are saved.
Spoiler alert. Upcoming show.
and that we have to. It's important that we start that process while we're in this world. Swedenborg says, but that once we've started the process of regeneration, the system is designed so that we are just perfected to eternity. And he even says that if you're a good person, and you live a life according to, the true ideas that and you're wanting to serve other people, whatever, if you're just generally a good person like that, but you haven't necessarily started the kind of like spiritual trials or this or that might be more iconically your regeneration process, that will happen for you in the next life, like that the regeneration process happens there and that it continues to eternity. And so with this idea of purpose, that is each of our purpose. And so it's, even if we get started here, it's not that our physical lives, there's plenty of work we can do once we've started the process of regeneration, and then it can continue on forever. So that's my initial thought that jumped to mind.
Cool. That's it? That's all we have time for? Go ahead.
I've thought a lot about this, because you have this idea of only the good die young, and that kind of idea that's
catchy.
And so it sort of means all the old people are evil or something. I don't know what the implication is, but as I've thought about that, I thought it can't work that way, because for one thing, as soon as people started to get to a state of goodness, they'd be harvested out of here, and then you'd only have people who weren't so good left behind. And
it's like, why didn't I die yet?
I think once you get good, like Swedenborg got to a certain level and then lasted a really long time. When the average male Swedish life expectancy was 37, he lived to be 84. He didn't, you know what I mean? And I agree with what you said, Chelsea, that your purpose is this infinitely unfolding thing. Right, and I also think there's a lot of divine, like there's a lot of freedom in it, or we have choice about how, God is often sort of waiting to see what we're going to choose, so to speak, kind of thing. And So I don't think it's the case. I do think there are some remarkable stories of where someone finished a body of work or something, and then within a week or two, they passed on. Sometimes you read that kind of story. But I think in general, it's a more open-ended thing. And some people, I don't think we can conclude about people's death date what spiritual level they had gotten to, because it's all developmental here and on the other side.
Right. Shada, do you have any thoughts?
Well, only around the idea that we might have no idea what we came here to do as well.
Right.
Certainly we often have a goal or a grand plan, but I think a lot of the time it's better when we don't know what we're here for, or because then we don't get in our own way, or, our expectations don't, mold what we're doing.
I've had multiple grand plans, but none of them panned out. So I guess I'm with you on that.
Right.
Yeah, that's good.
So I don't remember what show it was, but we included this in the show. There's a passage in the Spiritual Diary where he says,
the reasons.
Here's the reasons people die. And he lists like four of them. And it was like, one is the use that you have for yourself, like the purpose, and that would be like what you were saying, Chelsea, of the regeneration work you can still do, how you can further your own soul. Two is the use to other people in the world, which might be like you're talking about, Jonathan, with it. You finish your body of work and then you go. And this, achieved our purpose. The purpose could be something, that we could be talking about something you're doing for other people in the world, or the work you're doing for yourself, which sets you up for eternity. But then, I don't know if then he also says that it's the use to spirits and angels,
right?
Which I never thought. Meaning, angels and spirits are always connected to us, and they sort of need us for stuff. So it could be that
they need physical world.
I'm here, all right, no, we need Curtis for like
need to keep
as a pair of shoes,
another decade.
And then I don't know what the fourth one was. But my point is,
that's probably the most important one.
Yes.
It was equally other life-centered, if I remember.
Yeah, it was something
I think
that.
there's only one about your life here, and everything else was about the other side, about your state of freedom or preserving certain things. I think something like that. I forget what it is.
Yep. And so I just think that you never know what factors are in there, and there's sort of as you're saying, as better. That's actually the state of being in the stream of providence. Is like, I don't know where this is going, and that's cool, because I'd rather have God steering and me trying to love everyone. I love every moment that I can and do good in there. So, fascinating question. Again, could be a show, but I'd love to hear what you guys were saying about it. Thanks, Soul Purpose Artists. Let's look at the next one from YouTube. This is Cynthia. My friend killed himself. Will he go to heaven? So that sucks. I mean, that's a really tough thing to go through. I'm not trying to equate it, but I have had friends who have taken their lives, and it's this really intense thing. And so, what happens? And there's been so much religious input on it already. A lot of traditions have strong opinions about what happens. But what does Swedenborg say, and what can we take out of his view of the afterlife? Does anyone want to go first on that?
I could jump in just with the thought that this isn't the case necessarily in all, or circumstances of taking your own life, but Swedenborg does say in a state of mental illness that we don't have our rationality. Our rationality is impaired, and so in that state, we're not held accountable to, and we're not responsible for evil that we might be committing in a state where our rationality is impaired, and so. If that, many of the suicides that are of people that I've been connected to, that is pretty demonstrably the case, that they are in a state of mental illness, and so, in that case, there's physical world things just interfering with their ability to have their spirit be fully functional in their body, and so in that case, it's not a like. The Lord's will is for everybody to go to heaven, and the Lord foresees evil and foresees, and I don't mean evil in that way of being personally accountable, but that wanting things that are feel cut off from God's love.
Yeah. Well, and you could just call the whole impact an evil that we all have to endure. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And
it has a huge impact. Yeah.
The Lord is taking care of that and will be, right there catching the person on the other side in terms of caring for for them and getting them the,
Right.
leading them into understanding and love.
Yeah.
I want to second Chelsea's point that everyone's born for heaven. It's very clear in what Swedenborg teaches that there's no plan for anybody to, no divine plan for anybody to go anywhere other than heaven. So you really have to fight against the current to not go there. And when people pass on, Swedenborg says that everyone is a welcome guest in the other world. So there's nobody's like, what are you doing here? Or you shouldn't have done that or something. They're all greeted. And everybody starts at the top with the highest angels. And you stay with them unless you opt out and you go down. And even then, opting out only means temporarily you opt out. But people are not comfortable in that particular state, whatever state they're in. So, I don't want to be with you. So they go down to the next level. It's like a pinball machine, the way I've pictured it, where you're the ball and you start at the top of the thing and then you work your way down from there. It's not the bottom fighting your way up. So the whole thing is tilted, to use another pinball terminology, towards getting us the best possible outcome, getting us to go to heaven. You really have to be determined to fight that system and reject everything. Not only that first time around after you die, but months or years later as you go through your process, you've got to really reject everything. So I'm certain that every option for heaven is open, for someone in that circumstance.
Shana?
Yeah, I've also heard, families of people who have accomplished suicide, that they talk about not wanting to remember that person or have their life or their memory defined by that one act. And I think God looks at it the same way too, right? And that Swedenborg makes it pretty clear that it's our intention and its context that all plays into what our actions mean for the formation of our eternal soul. And so, I think that's just a really important part of it. I don't think there's really any situation in which one act could be the defining act for our entire spiritual trajectory.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, so I just want to rehash, long ago we made a little video on the channel called Do Suicides Go to Hell? And I sort of I feel nervous whenever someone watches that video, because I'm there's two audiences you would talk to about suicide. Right. There's the grieving family, the family,
right.
And then there's the person who's thinking about doing it. Right. And it's you want to talk to the people who knew, because there's been all these religious traditions that have said that's an automatic ticket to hell. And so now you've got you're not just suicide is this really complex, terrible cocktail of stuff, because it's you're upset at the person but love the person and grieving all this stuff. So you don't want the family to be going through that and have this they're in hell forever now, this weird. So you want to talk to the family and say according to Swedenborg in the video we say what you said, which is no one act is gonna sway your whole who you are and what you love, especially if, as you were mentioning, Chelsea, it's done in a state of mental illness. So no, that's not going to do it. On the other hand, it's not like Swedenborg says go for it. There's he talks about that he doesn't mention it much, but he does. If you just search suicide, he talks about a person in the spiritual world who killed themselves and couldn't let go of their knife. They
right.
couldn't, which just seems to indicate it's not a way out of troubles. We just think
right. It's not a solution.
It's gonna even if you have this, you were mentioning, this amazing reception with angels, the problem, whatever, is still there. So anyway, do you see what I mean? I'm almost I don't want.
Yeah, it's hard.
You want to tell the family it's okay. It doesn't mean that they go to hell. But you don't want to tell someone who's thinking of it. Yeah, it's fine. So it's so I'm glad we just put all the perspectives out here.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Do we want to? And it could be many shows, and I would love to talk through it more with people who have been close to it, and just to see. There's so much, and I hope my final point is that what you were saying, Chelsea, about it being a disorder, that it seems the more they study it, the more they find out. This is not just somebody well, I guess I'll do it. It's this degenerative progression, and you barely have free choice by the time it's happening.
Or it's pre-rational in general, young people who are teenagers, and so in that case as well, they're under these extreme pressures, and so even if they're not considered mentally ill, they're according to Swedenborg, they're still pre-rational. They're not
Right.
rational human beings yet. So they're not, it's not,
And Swedenborg talks about having those impulses himself, that and then he finally found out years later which spirit was causing him to have those impulses. But every time he'd see a knife, there would be the idea that he should plunge it into himself.
Yeah.
And he couldn't figure it out. And then it turned out it was somebody who was really angry with him, who was in the spirit world and everything.
Right.
And but so it gives you some sense. Occasionally you get a sense from Swedenborg and how the spirits can press in sometimes on a situation like that. And,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's tough.
Yes.
Tough
I guess
situation.
this is going on, but that just reminds me that in this whole where we are, that we do just have the influence of, Swedenborg would say, since the Lord's second coming, we have the ability to more openly connect with spiritual truths and not just get so lost in the hell and separateness that we can feel like we're in this world. And so that's, for everybody, like you said, for the people who maybe are considering it themselves, it's like, I think, I don't know, there's just organizations and people, there's like more tools, I think, than there ever were to sort of help you get,
Right.
I don't know, get the help you need now so that doesn't, so you don't feel so, burdened by that or something.
It is true that I think that it doesn't, when I've had inclinations that way myself, I have had the thought that it doesn't solve, I'll still, the same issues will follow me. You get to go see the angels, that's great, and all this stuff, but you'll come back down, and then that same issue,
Right.
the more I believe in life after death, it doesn't, it's not like you can end your life, it's just going to continue somewhere else
Right.
or something like that.
Right.
But there's a whole lot of other people who are hurt by it and so on. So
Right. And hopefully, in the next life, anything that is a physical cause,
Right.
of mental illness,
blood chemistry or whatever
exactly,
it might be.
that's removed, but of course, the way we live our lives, the mind and the body are intimately connected. I don't think it's ever going to be just one or the other, they're
Right.
intimately connected. So hopefully a lot of the influence of, as we say, brain chemistry can be fixed, but there still
Right.
will be things to deal with.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah. Well, let's leave it there. I mean, we should just do shows where it's
Compassion.
one question, and that's all we do is talk about it.
That's right.
So, and also thanks to Cynthia for being willing to share something that personal and
love
open up the
to
conversation.
Cynthia and everybody who's affected by this.
That's
Totally.
right.
And I feel like
Absolutely.
being able to talk about it is important, because if there's like a stigma around, then it
That's
makes
true.
it even worse
That's
and worse.
true.
So thank you, Cynthia. Let's look at our next question. This is from John. Why does Swedenborg consider some books of the Bible divine and others not? And what are his feelings about the epistles? Are they still worth reading? Well, we're laughing because the gentleman to my left has done a lot of research into that subject. So we won't let him answer this question. We'll see if we can piece it together. No, but go ahead. So what?
So, yeah, you go.
So the premise. Let me just. The premise is that Swedenborg talks about an internal sense to the Bible. He says that it
Right.
has this like extra layers of meaning and all this stuff, but he doesn't. He specifies certain books that have it, and he says some books have a little of it, and doesn't mention or seems to. Anyway, clear it up. What's he talking about?
All right. Okay, so a little complex, but I'll see if I can do it quickly. That
Setting the
if
timer.
you arrange Swedenborg's published theological works on the shelf in the sequence in which they were written, his position changes on this over time, from the early books to the later books. A lot of people, even people dyed in the wool, been reading Swedenborg all their lives, don't know that. This is a little known fact, but it's absolutely true. And so in one of his relatively early books, Secrets of Heaven or Arcana Celestia, he says toward the end that here's a list of the books that are part of the Word and the rest are not.
Yeah.
And he does say that pretty clearly. Now, he says that once in a book, then he copies it into another book that was published a couple of years later, and then he copies it a third time, and the third time he says, and in his first list, Job is left out of the list, and he copies it and Job is still left out, and the third time he copies it again, and then he says, well, Job is full of correspondences, of course, but but it's not the same, or something.
Yes.
So it's already starting to crack a little bit. as he goes on, and he never uses his turn signal. I think the 18th century didn't have turn signals, and so he would never say, I'm changing my position right now. You know, you wouldn't do that. You know what I mean? That's what I mean by turn signal. But later on, he starts to quote from those books more and more. Partway through Divine Providence, he starts quoting from Paul.
From the ones that aren't
in the
included.
epistles, the ones that he doesn't include. He never quotes the epistles in Secrets of Heaven, his big biblical first work there. But he starts to quote from it, and then he starts to say better things about them and all this. And by his last and final work, True Christianity, he quotes constantly from the epistles in there. The whole book ends, the last page of the first edition is 3 quotes in a row from the epistles. People don't realize that. And he refers to them some 15 times in there as the Word. He calls them the Word. So early work, he says it's not the Word. Later work, he says they are the Word. And he writes in a letter about in the middle of this time period, and somewhere in the 1760s, writes a letter to his friend Gabriel Bayer, because Bayer said to him, why don't you quote the epistles? And he said, there are some books of the Word that have this direct connection with heaven, with correspondences. There are others that, because they were written to launch a new religion, they could not be written in the obscure language of correspondences. They had to be doctrinal. Part of what strikes me is that I think Swedenborg's works are the same. They're doctrinal because he's trying to launch a new thing. So interestingly, his books actually have an affinity with the epistles. A lot of his terminology comes out of the epistles, and that starts in number 1 of Secrets, all the way through a lot of these. So he even uses in a late unpublished work in the Coronis, twice he uses the phrase, the apostolic word, which is a collective term for the Acts and the epistles. They're the epistles of the apostles and the Acts of the apostles. It's the apostolic word.
There's a tongue twister in there somewhere.
So what I think he's doing is at the time that he was writing, the epistles were downtown. They were the courthouse. They were the city center
of the Christian religion,
of the Christianity.
Right.
Yeah, Paul's epistle to the Romans was like the constitution of Christianity. So I think how the Lord led him was at first he had to just get rid of those things, dial it back. Just read the prophets, the Gospels, the book of Revelation. Look at the whole thing without even consulting the epistles. And then later on, he could bring them in as a secondary thing. If they're in second place, we're great. It's very valuable stuff. Read, if you have a chance, True Christianity number 506, because in there you'll see that there was actually a group.
Would you say the Rose translation?
The Rose translation I consider quite good.
Top 10, for sure.
And in number 506, you actually see a group in the spiritual world already at the time that he's writing that is using the epistles and nothing but the epistles to make a case for what he calls the new church. It's fascinating. So it really evolves over time. I think once you got the right thing in the center, everything else can come back into the tent and we're all cool by the end. Right. Some of his followers thought, we'd better cut all these books out because Swedenborg said, but you got to read on and get the more nuanced picture. I don't know how that is as a summary, but...
It was beautiful. And so you're saying, slightly different in character. They don't have the same correspondence level, but not useless. Actually, very useful.
That's
and
right.
More closer to the center than you would have thought in the beginning.
That's right. And he does explain in several different works. He will explain the inner meaning of passages from the Acts and Epistles.
Oh, really?
Works that he said earlier on have no inner. He explains.
He's holding that on us.
Yes, he does. He explains the tongues of flame that come in the day of Pentecost in Acts chapter 2. He explains I think it's in 1 Peter, the elements will melt with fervent heat. And so, he explains the rules that the apostles had for what to eat, nothing strangled, nothing sacrificed to idols. And so he explains the inner meaning of passages in there. So I think it's like Job. It's not that it doesn't have an inner meaning, but there's still something a little different about those core works, Isaiah and the 4 Gospels and the book of Revelation.
Yeah. So,
interesting.
John, you asked, you got an answer.
Sorry I've never thought about it.
Does anyone else want to add anything?
Yeah, I think, one, it's so fascinating, for example, that Luke and Acts are written by the same author.
Same person.
Right, and one of them is apparently continuous correspondences
right.
and the other one isn't, which is fascinating.
Yeah.
But I really like what you're saying there about the like backing off a little bit and then the incorporation, because there are, several doctrinal points that Swedenborg is pretty much in opposition to Paul on,
That's
substitutionary
true.
atonement and,
That's true.
Salvation according to faith and all of that. But I think there's also a ton in the epistles that could be really useful to a Swedenborgian, reading it from a Swedenborgian point of view. And I think they're worth reading for sure. Although I would say that it's really helpful to have a guide.
Yeah.
Like if you, it's probably unusual in the Christian world to have never read the epistles, but if you grow up a Swedenborgian, you've never read the epistles, and until a certain point, and without any context, they can be a little difficult. So it's really helpful to have a guide somehow, right? Whether it's a teacher or a book or something to help you contextualize what's going on.
That's right.
And to explain, the ideas and themes that come up. And
right.
So
Swedenborg even gets to the point of saying that he believes that the epistles, and he doesn't believe this earlier on, but he comes to feel that the epistles actually teach a life of good works and salvation through good works equally as much as Jesus does in the four Gospels. He says that in this same letter to Dr. Beyer, which is pretty shocking. A lot of people, that's not the way a lot of people read the epistles, but he really does think they're on an equal footing.
Right. Well, it depends which epistle you read. Luther,
Sure,
for example, really did not like the book of James.
No, he doesn't. He doesn't. And I do like the book of James. It's a good,
Sore spot.
That's right.
And for more about that, check out spiritandlifebiblestudy.com. That's Jonathan Rose's Bible study. Do you have
That's right.
Do you have a name of a particular episode where you go in more detail on that?
Not on this particular point, but we deal with the epistles all the time in there. It's also broadcast on ustream.tv/channel/Nunklicet Bible Study, which is NUNCLICET Bible Study.
Yeah.
So
easy,
anyway, if you
easy to remember.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay,
Right.
well that's cool. Let's see what else the people got for us.
Great.
Thanks, John. Paladin, one warrior. If angels can fall out of heaven and back into the world of spirits, can they also fall into hell? And I think what Paladin, one warrior is referencing is a couple of times, including our reincarnation show, where we talk about these cycles Swedenborg describes, where you're in heaven, but then you go into like a night or winter state, where he actually talked about angels being let down into the world of spirits in that period. So the question is, how low can you go? That's stupid. Okay, so does anybody have anything they want to say? What does he say?
An interesting just spin on it that comes to mind is the fact that Swedenborg, what I've read, I guess, is more often that angels who are in heaven, it's that certain hellish influences will somehow creep their way into heavenly communities. So less like an angel falling into hell, but that somehow through connection, through spirits in the world of spirits, he'll even, whether he says it's, in this one passage he says, a Satan or a devil or something snuck his way into a heavenly community.
Yeah.
And then he says, well, he didn't really come in. It's that he was influenced through these mediate spirits who were, associated with the hellish spirit and then affected the heavenly community. But that influence, though, can stir up angels' sense of self, which is their own personal hell that we carry with us all the time. But that is more or less dormant in us. And so I think in the case of angels that maybe one way to think about it is that they're not so much falling into hell as having hell sort of stirred up in them, but then it works its way out.
Poor Swedenborg, I've thought a lot about him having his spiritual eyes open, but his spiritual nose was also open. Yeah. And he talks about, and that was a little more costly to his person in the sense that he went through some unpleasant experiences. And he says that the evil spirits in hell cannot abide the smell of an angel. They cannot stand it. And likewise the other way. Like one of the stories of the type that you mentioned, some evil spirit sneaks in there, and if they sort of kind of hold their breath so you can't smell them, they don't really say anything or something. But pretty soon you figure, no. The smells actually repel each other, kind of thing. Which is
maybe if I wear lots of clothes, they won't notice my smell quite yet. Or something.
Right. And then when he goes back, isn't that the story that his fellow people down in hell they can smell the heaven on him?
All right.
And they take that off. Don't come in here with that on.
With that lilac.
So I don't think I don't think angels could make it all the way into hell with that smell thing operative.
Right. When what you mentioned about how you change place through these mediate spirits and all that, like there's a lot of like traveling without traveling in the spoiler alert, in the show we're about to do, Swedenborg talks about traveling through the universe, but doing so by changes of state mediated by spirits, etc. So there is this sort of, you can move and not move at the same time. Now angels have in them the tools to connect with hell, because Swedenborg says you never lose. You never don't have any dark side. You never don't have an ego. It's just the state of heaven is it's on the lowest. It's dormant to an extent.
Right.
So, but for the sake of continually making life better and perfecting the angels, as you guys were mentioning, you do get let down. So you still have this sort of like, well, I won't throw out that phone number. They still have it in them, even though God keeps them away most of the time. So I don't know. I don't know how. Probably some of them have more severe growth periods than others, which include more severe temptations, but it's not like fall into hell. It's not like, oh, I used to live in heaven, now I'm trapped in hell. I don't think you'd quite find that scenario, because as the ruling love is too different. It's just you're a different substance that can't hang out there and live there.
Yeah.
Do you have any
agree with that.
thoughts? Feel good?
Sounds good to me.
Okay, cool. Good. All right, so just get up there and then you'll be safe. Next one, thanks Paladin, one warrior. Stephen, does Swedenborg ever write about numbers like 333, 1111, or numerology? Yeah, I mean, well, I don't know. He writes about numbers. We did a show about numbers a while ago, and he often explains numbers in their biblical symbolism context, but he's got stuff to say. So do you guys have any wisdom about numbers? And because people wonder about this, they feel like they see a certain number repeating on a clock, or it's a coincidence. Why did I just happen to look at the clock when it's 3:33 or whatever? So did we touch on any of that? I know they weren't the same kind of clocks when Swedenborg was around, but
Do you want to launch into it? Go ahead.
I'd love to.
Good. Go ahead.
We got to go to commercial.
Well, it's a very strange thing. You might think of numbers and counting and all that sort of stuff as being of the more on the side of the intellect than the heart.
Yeah.
So you might think it's that's mathematical, that's geeky or something like that. It's very strange that Swedenborg says that the highest angels, who are more the heart types, have this language of numbers. They love numbers. Yeah. They can write whole thing. They can understand just strings of numbers. They can express amazing things through their numbers. And so Swedenborg gets led in on a little of that, I think. And he does discuss the numbers, and he says things like, well, 100 really basically means the same as 10.
Right.
And so does 1,000. What like the multiples? It's about the factors that go in there. So if 144 is really a 12 and stuff like this. So he certainly does get into that in a big way and say that that's a very high kind of language in the spiritual world.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting, given with the heart emphasis, because I think mathematics and music more something that engages the right side of the brain.
Interesting.
As opposed to the left, which
they
is
go
more,
together, don't they?
Yeah.
Often math and music and art
and harmony
stuff like
certainly
that.
does. Like ratios or what. Like that's sort of a subconscious thing that we have an awareness of.
Mathematical, yeah, that's right.
I just
really interesting.
Think about when I try to sing harmonies, and there's some math part missing in my brain. Some people could just jump in. I try it, but only in front of my wife. Okay.
Or now.
Yeah.
I wonder. I don't have an answer about this, but I just wonder about, because I think there is, like you said, the numerology that Swedenborg talks about is very biblical based, and he doesn't say so much whether. I mean, he mentions that angels speak in numbers. But he's not clear about, he's not doesn't clearly make the point that these numbers always have this exact meaning or something. Like, he's not going into it so much. And so I wonder sometimes, because people do draw so much meaning from the 11 number or the 333s, or, whether there is, whether numbers shift meaning in the same way that other things do in our world sometimes, like that a certain kind of animal might mean one thing for one person, or it might mean something slightly different for somebody else, or is there some, ultimate meaning or correspondence of it or something, or like, so what is that? How do you gain that sort of knowledge or something?
That reminds me of like in dreams, him describing angelic conversations coming into imagery because it means something to you, that Swedenborg knew someone who he felt like was superficial, and they were talking about superficiality, and so that guy showed up in his dream. So does it mean something different for different people? And I'm wondering, can we get the wide shot? I guess you probably couldn't even see it, but so there's 4 mugs here. Like, does a mug have a correspondential meaning, right? It's got to. Everything does. So then does 4 mugs mean something? Like that, right. Does 4, it's certainly like certain arrangements of numbers of objects can make me feel a little different. So I wonder if that's it, but he doesn't really, as far as I know, ever go into that. So.
Right. And it just seems like a person's own knowledge and association with things would come into play if they are seeing the number 333 a lot of the time. Like, I have certain numbers that I see that I draw just some simple sort of meaning from for myself, but it's entirely personal. I would not find that number, I wouldn't project that number should mean the same thing or have any special importance to somebody else, because we attach ourselves to numbers, like our birthdays or our this or that, like they become our own, we put our personality on them or something. And so it's just interesting. I think there's a lot to be explored in what Swedenborg does write about numbers. Having read it a lot myself, I do apply that Swedenborgian lens to numbers too, Right. But that's... Yeah. So if somebody wants to dig in there, they certainly
I've
can.
told friends that they have a bad phone number. and other people have I had a friend who's got a really good one, like all 10 digits. They were amazing.
Should we change our number now? Jonathan Rose says it's no good. Because like 333, that's like 3 is completeness. So you have 3 threes. That should be like...
That's right.
But right, does it mean something different? And do our, like when we're a kid and you have a favorite number, is that because of this, you're tapping into the universal meaning? Or is it just like, my birthday's on the 10th. So these are the enduring questions. But
they are.
But I do think there's a future in taking everything Swedenborg does say about it and getting some people who know and love numbers and math and like getting them to think about and see patterns in it and deduce from greater wholes. So there's probably a ton we can learn just even with a few building blocks he gives us, but you'd have to really know the number side of it.
We'll have to have a math panel someday.
Get
a bunch of
like just send in equations and we'll just like nail them. I'll be sitting to the side for that.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Let's look at our next question. This is from the BL202. Are our loved ones who have passed able to communicate with us through our dreams?
I would say yes.
Yeah.
They are able.
I'm gonna give it a yes.
Shauna?
Oh, we're taking a...
I don't know.
We're doing a poll.
We're doing a poll.
No
Okay.
A straw,
Yes.
A
Yes,
totally
my answer is
random
yes.
straw sample. Yeah, I think so too.
So we need some elaboration.
Well, I'm not going to... Well, I'll just add, I am Swedenborgian, but I recently had the opportunity to get to have a conversation with a woman who's of the Baha'i faith.
Yeah.
And it was just delightful to get to hear how, almost casually, but obviously it had great importance to her, that she spoke about how her father and her brother, who had passed on, would come to her in dreams. And it was just great to hear her. It made so much sense that the kind of support they offered her was, especially when she was going through hard times, like dealing with something physical world-ish, like cares and concerns of the physical world that had her stressed out. And then it would be that she'd have a dream and a loved one would come to her and just give her a sense of peace, and it's okay, it's going to be okay, just this message that that heaven would give to us, and that would help her, face the physical world life. And I just feel like, that is just a sweet setup. If we could just have more of this sense of, already sleep is such a restorative thing, but so in a way, I wonder if subconsciously we are just having that kind of association in our sleep that just helps us face the day-to-day of, oh yeah, the physical world. So much worry, so many concerns.
It's been very cool to me a few times where I've had dreams of a deceased loved one, and they, I'm in a whole party, and there's all these people milling around, and people are doing stuff. But then there's this person who's sort of like more alive than the other people at the party, you know. And I realize, oh, it's you, or something like that. And there's some sort of sense of exchange and so on, even though there's all these other bit players in there or something like that. Yeah. There was another time someone who had passed on, and I picked up the phone, and they were talking in my dream, and they were talking to me on the phone, like we could have a conversation on the phone, or, you know. Anyway, I think it is neat, and I think one way to evaluate these things, as you were saying, is what's comforting or hopeful or positive. You know, sometimes people can just, you know, they hack in and they, you know, give you some weird dream or something that's disturbing, you know. Yeah.
Oh, and that reminds me. I mean, yeah, I'll share this dream I had, but in terms of discerning what is it a real presence of that person's spirit, or is it not? Is it just your own, you know, imagination or memory of that person? And my mom died when I was 10, and I had some very incredible dreams right after she died where I felt like I had clear connection and presence with her. And then several years where I didn't. And when I had my last dream, she had said, "You're not going to see me for a while," you know, and I knew, but it's going to be okay, with sort of this sense. And then I, sure enough, you know, didn't have any dreams of her for many years. And then it wasn't until I was probably in my mid-20s that I reflected on this, and I don't know what it was exactly, where I ended up having a dream where she appeared to me in my dream in my house, like, you know, normal, like you'd see somebody in your house. And it was one of these situations where I was super stressed out about something, and I was somehow communicating that to her, and she just did this hilarious, like, flip of her head of just sort of like this, "Oh, come on, get over it," like sort of, you know, expressing the sort of like, it was just fabulous, and it was so on point, and it was just like, just that reflection was enough for me to sort of realize, oh, I don't need to hold what I'm stressing about quite so hard. Yeah. And because it was such a sort of lighthearted, weird, short dream where that's all I saw, I questioned, did I really see her? Or like, why was it her and not somebody else? And I ultimately felt like this Baha'i faith lady sort of expressed to me that, no, I think that probably was her, because I think that is that use of our loved ones on the other side, is they can just sort of give us this higher perspective that helps us see our physical world concerns in a easier, more lighthearted way.
Yeah. That reminds me of I don't know which book it is, but you heard just like sort of, oh, come on, and that lightening your load. There was this book of this woman was telling a story of a friend of hers who was a prison counselor, and it was murdered in the prison by someone she was counseling, and the friend was agonizing over what was it like, and like what were the final moments like and everything, and she had this dream. And I forget the exact thing, but her friend sort of poked fun at her a little bit, like, "I'm fine. Why are you even?" I think the phrase was that gentle chiding did more to lighten my spirits than anything else possibly ever could have. So there's something about this, like, that perspective that you're talking about, it's fine.
Yeah.
So it's like, wow,
it was very funny.
Jana?
Well, on a slightly different note, I think sometimes about how much does it matter, or how important is it that we remember our dreams? Because we're dreaming a lot more than we consciously remember when we wake up. Anyway, I say this because personally I don't remember my dreams very often at all, except when they're kind of harrowing. And so I kind of like feel like I only ever remember bad dreams. And so, you know, I am thankfully, you know, I haven't lost a loved one who is very close to me. And I haven't had the experiences of having anyone like that visit my dreams, but I sometimes worry, like, would I remember if they did? You know, like, hopefully it would be as meaningful, right, as the things you describe, where of course I would wake up and remember it, but I don't know, you know, and is it possible that they are with us when we're sleeping and we don't remember, you know, because it doesn't have some sort of searing connection to whatever we're going through in the moment. I don't know.
Yeah.
I wonder.
Well, and I think that communication through dreams, we maybe, because we are these physical world people, that like we think so much in visual terms, and so a dream is, I can remember it because I see the picture in my mind of what was happening in the dream. But as I've read Swedenborg and contemplated these things for myself too, it's been helpful to realize that it's the feelings that I wake up with that I think are a communication with heaven. That sometimes when you wake up and you just feel peaceful, who knows, what the connection was or something. But I do think that is that feeling level of like maybe even really high angels of heavenly angels that are present, that are giving you that. So it's kind of a trick question where it's like, from a Swedenborgian perspective, we are always communicating with our loved ones and with angels and spirits, and so
some deep level, right?
That there are angels that love you like as deeply as family members do, even if you don't feel like you've met them.
Right.
But I had that. What are you talking about in a major way a few nights ago, where I woke up like feeling like awesome, and I was like, whatever, I'm like rich in some way, like something cool has happened, and I barely remember anything of the dream. And just between you guys and I, it was like Swedenborg stuff related. Like somebody in my dream was like had like somehow like watched our show or done something, and they were like, "This helped so much," and that's all I remember from the dream. But I woke up like just feeling like really good. I was like, this is awesome, and it didn't like fade quickly. I was
That's
like,
great.
this is sweet. So whatever it was, some heavenly residue in there.
Yes,
that's nice.
All right, I think we're going to do another one. We're going to do one more question before we wrap it up here. So thanks everybody. Let's take a look at who the last lucky contestant is. Goldie. Swedenborg says that good spirits don't get punished for wrongs done in this life. How are wrongs repaired when they have done a damaging act against another person in life? So she's referencing recently on a show we did talk about how Swedenborg says that you're not sort of tallying up a score and then that is you did this many bad things, you get 6 years and then you're free. That if you're focused on good, then you don't even have to worry about that stuff. But yeah, somebody who overall is focused on good could have done a lot of harm in various ways. Probably has. So how do you reconcile these two, and how do we get to healing, based on that? So Chada, do you want to kick this one off?
Well, I think it would have to do with how much all of those questions are integrated with our sense of journey, right? Okay. Like, it matters, I think, whether or not what we did was accidental, or whether or not we deliberated upon it, or whether we felt like we did the best we could, or whether we were just lazy. Like, I think all of that plays into what kind of processing happens for us when we're in heaven. Yeah, totally. And I think also the closeness of the relationship of the people that we wronged. Mm-hmm. I think that, like I sort of, exist in my white privilege in this world, probably perpetuating a bunch of systemic oppressions that I don't necessarily consciously, can apologize to everybody that I've affected. But if I had done something very particularly wrong during parenting or something, then I think that would feel like it would be a really important thing to process in the next life, because I feel like it has to do with my own identity, my own identity as a person who loves and what I love. And it would feel important to me to know where I went wrong, and how to fix that. So, I don't know, that's my first stab at it.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
My first, I've got two sort of answers in mind. One is from actually near-death experience sources that people talk about. You get to feel the effect that you've had on other people. That's such a powerful idea. Swedenborg doesn't say that point blank exactly or whatever, but I'm very drawn to that idea that there's it's a world of truth. It's an honest world. And something that one NDE person said that was really amazing to me was that he said, you can see the other person and how they reacted, and you can also see what their baggage was that was activated, and they can see your baggage, you can see your baggage. There's something that heals the whole thing, is to sort of have this multi-layered perspective on what went down, which I think is healing for everybody, that you're all almost like actors after the play or something like that. I'm not trying to take away from the seriousness of the harm that people do each other.
Yeah.
Swedenborg has a passage in Heaven and Hell toward the end there where he talks about, with really serious stuff that people have done, crimes, that there are trials, there are historic reenactments. It sounds like one of these shows on, like 2 hours of, looking into, and yet, unlike all those shows, you actually get the answer. You know, did so-and-so do it, or did so-and-so not? And you see all the thoughts and the feelings, and the whole thing is acted out. He doesn't talk about this, like what sort of emotional effect it might have. But for someone who's been poisoned by someone under a guise of friendship, is one example that he gives. It would be pretty powerful to just, like, that they know, and you know they know, and they, like the whole thing is public. There's no hiding it. I would think there would be some closure, some sort of process, some kind of emotional something that goes on in that way, and I think that would address the wrong. There's something about wrongs where it just, in one sense, it can never be righted. You know what I mean? That's one of the awful things. You can't unsay the thing that you said. You can't undo the thing that you did. But to have that spiritual perspective, I think, probably helps a lot, and have the truth come out.
It makes me think of the part of this which says good spirits don't get punished, because you think about somebody who, let's even say, poisoned somebody, but they, before they died, deeply regretted what they did, and they feel terrible, and they would like did everything they could to try to make amends, and already feel it would be a different use in the truth coming out than if the person was still trying to say, like, I didn't do that, or I was justified in doing that. There's that sort of factor.
It seems like a denial buster. Like he describes dramatic scenes where the person, rises up out of the grave and says, this. That's right.
Chelsea?
I don't know if I have any other thoughts on it.
I have one final one then, which is, seems to me like, so I definitely fluctuate in like, I feel like I'm, a nice person now, and now I feel like I'm kind of more self-centered, but it feels like the closer I am towards being a good person and like adopting higher principles, the more that I'm excited about righting any wrongs that I might have done. And the Swedenborg sort of talks about the difference between heaven and hell is like, hell is whatever is mine is good. So like if I did something, it's okay that I did it because I had a good reason. Where heaven is, you love what's true or good independently. So you love justice, you love aiding people who are in need and that sort of thing. So it seems to me like whenever I'm getting closer to heaven, I'm more like, oh yeah, and if I did that, I really want to like make all the amends I possibly can to this person. And it sort of feels like exciting because it's like, I did this thing that was harmful, and so I can I have a special angle on being able to just like say to whichever, I said something mean to somebody in school when I was a kid or something, to just be like, you're cooler than I am. Like, I'm so sorry. Like, that was so dumb that I said that. And like, even though that doesn't fix it all the way, but do you see the dynamic I'm talking about? That the more you get into heaven, the more you're like right on board with like, let me do this, because it doesn't have the same personal attachment of like, well, I don't, I had my reasons for that. You're just like, truth, like justice, truth and goodness. Like, how can we? So something like that.
Wasn't there that Wimbledon amazing episode where the one not long ago, in the past year or so, where the person serves and it's called in, or whatever it was, the guy who would have lost out by it told the other person, you should challenge the call, because like the call was in his favor, and he told the other guy,
wow.
He just told him, you challenge it, challenge it, and everybody sort of in the crowd is like, what just happened? And
Yeah.
then everybody just freaks out because they challenge it, and the point does go to the other guy.
Wow.
But emotionally, this guy really won big for, like he cares
Right.
more about the game being done right
Yeah.
than his getting his own points and everything. It's a cool video.
Yeah.
It's out there.
Well, that said, let's see what our final scores are for this episode. All right, guys, that's our show for tonight. Thanks so much for joining us. If you enjoyed this programming, please like and subscribe. That helps this kind of stuff get out into the world and more people to ask more questions. We'll see it next time. Also, we're a nonprofit, so we run off donations. Here's a quick clip about our philosophy and how you can help.
We want the ideas and insights we cover to be available for free to anyone, anytime they need them. That's why we offer Swedenborg's books as free downloads on Swedenborg.com, and we produce this show and other content on our Off the Left Eye YouTube channel with no paywall or ads. The only way to keep this up, though, is for those of you who like what we're doing and feel comfortable giving, to give. If the idea of helping others have easy access to the content we produce feels meaningful to you, please consider supporting this cause with a donation. Give if you can, receive if you need. If we cycle through this way, in the end, everybody wins.
So, 2 final announcements. Shada, you're just going to have to be on camera for these, so sorry about that. One is, and I have no idea where this graphic is going to appear, but important thing coming up with Patreon. Oh, there it is. Patreon. I don't know if you guys have heard of it, but later this week we're going to be launching a program that will allow you to both be part of what we do and get extra bonus content to enrich your experience. So we're very excited, and you'll hear more about that in this coming week. Also, next week on Monday, we're going to be looking into heaven and specifically asking the question, what if I don't like heaven? So if you've ever wondered that, or you just feel like that might be fun, hang out with us then. We'll see you then. Same time, I want to say thanks to the whole panel, everybody for coming. It was just great to hear you talk and think, and I just come away feeling enriched, and I hope everyone at home was too. So thanks very much, guys. All right,
Thanks, Curtis.
See you next week, everybody.
Swedenborg in Life is Amy Aquarola, Morgan Beard, Curtis Childs, Karen Childs, Matthew Childs, Alexa Cole, John Connolly, Cara Dom, Chris Dunn, Stuart Farmer, Ben Keys, Reed McCardle, Chelsea Odner, Jonathan Rose, Shiloh Silverman, and Shada Sullivan.